All right, so maybe we'll make a start. Um, so yeah, like I say, you're very welcome to the third week of the course. And what we're going to do this evening, and then is it'll follow a similar format to last week. Actually, we'll have the breakout rooms to start with. Then I'll talk a little bit about tonight's theme, which is views. We're going to be talking about the habitual ways that we come at things, and how we can come at things in a way that's a little bit more conducive to freedom. Then we'll have a break. And just to say, after the break, we'll have a period of questions and answers. So if you do have questions, you can throw them into the chat at the break there. After which, we'll have a little bit more on the theme, and we'll do some meditation, and then we'll set up our practice for the week. So that's the plan for this evening. So yeah, just to remind you where we've come from. So we've been exploring this whole area of work, and part of the purpose of this, we were just discussing this. We have a little team meeting before each evening, and we were just discussing how what the course is kind of about is just bringing some attention to the whole area of work. So very often, work is kind of something that we just kind of accept or as just an unnecessary evil. We kind of think of it in that kind of way. It's just something we've got to get through so that we can live the life we want to live. And we can be quite uncreative about it. We just sort of feel that, well, that is the way it has always been, and that's the way it's always going to be. So the course really is about just bringing some attention to that area of our life, asking some questions of it, and seeing if we can just be a little bit more creative. And hopefully that's happening in your work. You're just able to be a little bit more creative with what's going on. Try a few things out. See if you can actually challenge that feeling that you might have that, well, this is the way it always is going to be, and I just have to kind of just knuckle down and bear it. So hopefully that's happening. It sounds like it is from what I've heard from the different groups. So just in terms of what we've been looking at in terms of content. So in the first week, we looked at the whole area of ethics, the 5 precepts, kindness, generosity, truthfulness, and mindfulness, and just how we can put those principles into practice in our working life. And when I say working life, I'm aware that that's not necessarily paid work. A lot of us aren't in paid work at the moment, or paid work is part of what we're doing. But we're all engaged in tasks, necessary tasks to live our lives. So what we looked at in the first week in particular was the first precept. So recognizing that we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to live our lives. We've got all kinds of pressures on us. We've got all kinds of concerns. We've got things that make us happy and things that make us unhappy, etc. And just remembering that other people are also in that situation also, and actually living from that. What we did last week is we looked particularly at the 5th precept, the precept on mindfulness. So we heard that mindfulness has 3 different aspects. So mindfulness has the aspect of present moment awareness, and it has the aspect also of continuity of purpose. So we spoke a little bit about how we can apply ourselves more consciously and more deliberately to strengthen that continuity of purpose throughout the course of our working day. And we also looked at the area of ethical sensitivity. So that mindfulness also is this sense that we have of what kind of the state that we're in, whether our mental and emotional state is a skillful one or it's unskillful. So that's part of mindfulness too. And we just know what's going on. We have a sense of what's going on. And actually, from there, we looked at the whole area of meditation a little bit more in terms of working with the mind during and through the course of our tasks, what we have to do with our life. And we talked in terms of recognizing the hindrances. And also, I think maybe something that didn't come out as much as it could have last week is the kind of positive counterparts to the hindrances. So the positive counterpart to kindness, to ill will is kindness. The positive counterpart to craving for sense experience is contentment. The positive counterpart to restlessness is wholeness and peace. The positive counterpart to sloth and torpor is energy, and the positive counterpart to doubt is commitment. So how we can actually look to, rather than trying to get rid of something, try and move towards what we're trying to cultivate. And that tends to be psychologically more helpful to think in terms of what are we trying to move towards, what are we trying to cultivate, than what we're trying to get rid of. And it's worth just bearing in mind that the mindfulness of breathing particularly helps with developing continuity of purpose. We explored that last week. The Metta Bhavana refines and hones that ethical sensitivity, that aspect of awareness. It makes us more keenly aware of particularly the presence of aversion or the absence of aversion. So, we can see how, meditation, in terms of Buddhist practice, whilst we can work on our mind all the time, it's as if meditation sharpens everything up. It's the point in our day when we're consciously and deliberately working on the mind with the mind. That's the main focus of what we're doing when we meditate. Whereas in the other points during the day, that process is going to be a bit more diffuse. It's going to be a little bit, there's going to be other things going on. But when we meditate, we're fully and wholeheartedly working with our mind to generate that stream of uninterrupted, skillful mental states. So we finished last week by thinking of something to practice, devising something for ourselves that we're going to have a go at practicing during the course of the week. So really, what we're going to do in a moment is just talk about that, and it might lead to some interesting discussion. So you might find that in the group it feels useful and fruitful and enjoyable, even just to get into discussion about some of the things that we've been hearing about and practicing, rather than just reporting in. Although that might be a good place to start. So I'll just before we go into the groups, I'll just give you a minute just to cast your mind back over the week, and also to bring to mind any questions that might have arisen for you during the course of your week. Okay, Stephen, can you roll the groups? Just to remind you that if you weren't here last week, you'll need to choose the group yourself. You'll need to look at the list, go down to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen in a moment, and you should be able to do that now. Yeah.
Yeah, just open
there it says, where it says join a breakout room. So you'll need to click on that, and then click on the breakout room that you're in, either last week or the week before. If you can't remember, don't worry about it. Stephen can help you get into the right place. So that if your group was anything like the group that I was in, there's a lot. It stirs up a lot of stuff, and it's which is part of the point, actually. To be honest, is to raise some of these questions and explore what's actually really going on. Hopefully, as well, you have some resources and some ideas about what to do. And part of it, actually, part of the way that we find those resources is often actually just talking about what's going on. Often we don't talk about what's really going on. So part of this is just to open up a space where we can hear what's going on and hear what's going on for other people, and also try and articulate what's going on for us. And hopefully through that, some new perspectives will emerge that will be helpful. And in a way, that's what I wanted to talk about now, are those perspectives, are those views, as we call them. So just to rewind a little bit, so Buddhism as a path is concerned with transformation. That's really what it's about. It's concerned with the transformation of self, of ourself, of our body, of our speech, and of our mind. In other words, what we say and what we do and what we think. And it's also concerned with transformation of the world, of our environment. Now, this course, of course, is concerned with transforming work. And that's where the two come together, where we come into contact with the world, and probably in the most direct and challenging way. It's when we come into contact with the whole economic system, and we participate in it necessarily. Very difficult to work without participating in the economic system that we're in some way. Now, that's a whole other question that in a course that's 4 weeks long, it's not really possible to cover, but it's worth just noting that there's a whole big question of how do we participate in an economic system in a way that's expressive of ethical principles and spiritual principles. Quite a big question. So what we've been doing on this course, I'm just going to leave that there, but you might like to reflect on that yourself. What we've been doing on this course is looking at work in terms of ethics, meditation, and wisdom. So we started by looking at ethics, so looking at the way that we behave in relation to others and the way that we behave in relation to others in our work, recognizing that for most of us, maybe all of us even, work will be a relational thing. It'll be about working with other people, for other people, under other people, over other people, etc. And we also heard last week in particular about meditation in the sense of cultivating skillful mental states, transforming unskillful mental states. So developing the mind, training the mind. And one of the ways we do that is through mindfulness. So we heard about developing continuity of purpose and so on. So the third aspect of that threefold path of ethics, meditation, and wisdom is wisdom. And really what we're trying to do is to try and see things as they really are. To try and see things as they really are. Which suggests that a lot of the time we don't see things as they really are. We see things in a partial way, or even just in a blinkered way, or in a way which is just wrong, which is just mistaken or confused. So this wisdom is seen from the Buddhist in the Buddhist tradition as a liberating thing. So we're liberated from ignorance, we're liberated from assumption, we're liberated from projection, from all these things. We just see things as they really are, and that freedom comes from that. So that what we're going to do over the next 2 weeks is kind of look at this, to look at how we can approach our work in a way that's got a little bit more wisdom in it. And in that way, hopefully liberate ourselves from maybe some of the unhelpful habits that we've gotten into. So when we talk about wisdom in Buddhism, we often talk about views. And we start with the idea that we're always looking at things from a particular perspective. We always have a view. Now, just in the literal sense, we're looking at things from a particular perspective. You know, our eyes are here, and when we look, we see things from a particular perspective. We observe things from our point of view, and that becomes and vision. That what happens when we look at things is a metaphor very often in Buddhism for the way we understand things. You know, that our level of ignorance or wisdom. So it's when we talk about views, we're talking about it in the sense of what's our basic interpretation, what's our basic slant, what's our basic assumption or default attitude to things. That's what a view is. So it's broader than just something cognitive. It's not just what we think, but there's a very, very strong element of emotionality. Often our views, the way we think, are crystallizations of our emotional attitude. So, you know, it's like we want things to be a particular way, and then we kind of see things in the way that we want them to be, whether or not they are that way or not. It's like a crystallization of our desiring. or the affective aspect of ourselves. So, like I said, our view tends to be partial. It tends to be incomplete, and sometimes it's just wrong. We're just coming from a wrong assumption. We'd actually discussed this in our group just a minute ago, how we can, somebody had a really good example of how we can hear something that somebody says and assume it means something that actually they don't mean. So we make an assumption, and then we start living on the basis of that assumption without sometimes checking whether that assumption is correct or not. So we live our lives with these views, which kind of act as a filter. They filter everything that we perceive through our senses. A little bit like the blinders on a horse. You know, you actually see that in Dublin, not that infrequently. You see horses and they have blinders on. Now, what it does is it makes the horse, it just doesn't see things which might alarm it or disturb it or startle it. So views act a little bit like that. They just filter things out. So that we only see part of the picture. And another kind of example or another metaphor is like a filter on a camera. So if you put a filter on a camera, it filters out certain kinds of light, and then that distorts the image. So that's the point, is that these views, these frames which we view the world, they very often distort our understanding about what's going on. And that's the basis on which we act. We act on the basis of what we think is going on, not on the basis of what's actually happening. So this is in contrast with the Buddha. And when I was thinking about this, it just occurred to me that there's a famous text called Pingia's Praises of the Way to the Beyond, and it's this disciple of the Buddha who's praising the Buddha. And he says a lot of things about the Buddha, but one thing he says is they call him Buddha. Now, Buddha, of course, means awakened. So he's woken up to the truth of things. He's the dispeller of darkness, and this is the key bit, with all-round vision. So the Buddha has all-round vision. And so he's got the sense of understanding things in the round. He doesn't have a partial perspective. He's got a kind of a complete or a whole perspective. So what we realize is that, what we start seeing, I think, and probably you've noticed this, is you start noticing, if you become aware, you start looking at your behavior, you start noticing that you're looking at things in a particular way. Now, what we have a choice about is we can look at things in a helpful way, or we can look at things in an unhelpful way. We can think about things in a helpful way or think about things in an unhelpful way. Now, hopefully, what we've learned through this course, or through any Buddhist course that you might do, any Buddhist book or any Buddhist teaching, is hopefully what you'll pick up are some helpful ways of thinking about things that help unlock some of these assumptions and help us see things a little bit more clearly. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to move from seeing things in a way which is mistaken, which is partial, which is incorrect, which is blinkered, to seeing things in a way which is more approximate to what's really going on, which is what we call, and then from there moving on to actually seeing things as they really are. So a direct, immediate understanding of what's really happening. So we have this kind of movement from a wrong view, which is that mistaken, confused assessment of things, to a right view, which is a more helpful way of thinking. And that in turn leads to this, what you could call perfect view, where we just see things as they really are. We don't even think about them, we just know them as they really are, that kind of the all-round vision that the Buddha possesses. So this is important if we want to make real progress in our in our life, really. We need to recognize what our views are, particularly if they're unhelpful, and move to ways of looking at things, ways of thinking about things that are more helpful, that are going to lead us to that direct, immediate understanding, that direct, immediate vision, that direct, immediate experience of things as they really are. So the question then is, well, how do we do that? Now, traditionally, what we do is we try and see what are known as the three marks or the three characteristics of existence or conditioned existence. So this is a way of looking at our lives that reveals what is really happening. So it's not that the three marks are actually what's happening, but the three marks are a way of looking at things, a frame or a perspective that will reveal what's really going on. So I'll just say what they are. Those of you who've done a little bit of study into Buddhism will recognize them immediately. They're known as the three. Well, I said that already. The three marks, or the three lakshanas. You might know them as the three lakshanas. So the first one is impermanence. So all things are impermanent. All conditioned things are impermanent. The second one is that all conditioned things are unsatisfactory, so that the mark of unsatisfactoriness. And the third is, the second is unsatisfactoriness, and the third is insubstantiality, that things don't have an unchanging core, that everything is, like a cloud that comes into being and then it dissipates again. I'll say more about the third one next week. Tonight, I want to focus on impermanence and unsatisfactoriness. So the Buddha is saying that all conditioned things, in other words, the usual world in which we live, is characterized by those three things, or those three qualities, or those three characteristics. So yeah, like I say, it's not that things are impermanent and unsatisfactory in the literal sense, that it's that if we look for impermanence, we look for unsatisfactoriness, we'll wake up to what's really going on. So that's what this path of wisdom is about. We try and cultivate right view by actively looking for impermanence. So rather than waiting for it to bite us on the bum, as it were, we actually actively look to see it in operation. We almost come to expect it. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But it's also worth noticing. I'm just going to change something here. Just realizing that our state of mind also has a big effect on the way that we see things. So when we're trying to develop skillful mental states, when we're trying to free our mind from unskillful mental states, right view, a more appropriate way of thinking about things, is more likely to be able to come into our mind. Yeah. So there's a phrase which I think it's kind of one of these commonplace phrases, but I think it's quite apt, and that is that anger makes you stupid. So if we get really, really angry, it narrows our perspective immediately. We focus in on what it is about a person that we don't like, and everything else is forgotten about. You notice that particularly when you're angry with somebody who you're really close to and maybe you've really benefited from, and then when you're angry with them, all you can think about is a thing that they do that you don't like. It's really a bit disturbing. But all of the hindrances, craving, restlessness, sloth and torpor, doubt, they all cloud our mind. So one way we can develop wisdom is by freeing our mind from unskillful mental states. And often what we'll find, and you might have found this already, in fact, some of you definitely have because you've talked about it, is that you notice that underneath, as it were, your unskillful mental state, underneath your aversion, there's a view. There's a view that maybe, that everybody's out to get you. There's a view that everybody should treat you fairly at all times. There's an expectation there or an assumption about life, which is just maybe unreasonable, and that generates this unskillful mental state. So often what we're dealing with is a complex of a way of understanding and a way of and an attitude that come together to form this view. So we can actually free our mind from wrong views by like I say, like we talked about last week, becoming aware of our mental states from moment to moment. And what I wanted to focus on just for the next little while is noticing when we get annoyed. In particular, notice when our assumptions are confounded. Now, this is where work is really, really good, because we're not dealing with abstractions when we're talking about work. We're dealing with things that are concrete. We get annoyed because we assumed that things were going to happen in a particular way and they didn't. And we experience this dissonance between the plan that we had, the idea that we had about how things ought to be, and what actually happened. And we actually experience that as a sort of a dissonance, a grinding of the gears. And that very often happens in work, doesn't it? Doesn't that happen? Like all of whatever work that you're doing, whether it's ordering 30,000 stainless steel bolts for a construction company, or whether it's getting the dinner on the table on time, you make a plan, and your work involves following that plan and seeing it through. Now, so what we have like an idea about how things are going to go, and then life unfolds, and then we have the reality of how things are actually unfolding. And very often that's where we experience our assumption that things should happen according to our thoughts. It's quite odd, actually, that we think that. So now I'm not saying that we shouldn't make plans, we have to, but what I think is worth noticing is how we expect life to unfold according to the plan that we have, according to the thoughts that we have. And it never quite works. But we expect it to. We have an assumption that it should, and when it doesn't, we often get annoyed, quite annoyed, maybe. So I think that this is where work becomes an opportunity to see this in operation, to see these views in operation, not as an abstract thing, but as an emotional reaction, as a dissonance between what we expect and what we assume and what actually transpires. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about this time last year, probably the same for most of us. My diary was just like sort of a post-apocalyptic war zone sort of scenario. Every single item in my diary was irrelevant in the space of about a day or two. And it was literally at this time, it was in March of last year when the lockdown happened. And I remember having this very, very peculiar feeling of all of the things which I'd planned just disappearing into space, just collapsing. Weirdly, I found that both quite disturbing but quite exciting. But so it's an opportunity, of course. There's always an opportunity that if we see it happening, if we recognize that things aren't unfolding quite the way we expected, if we recognize that, we know what's going on, we can be creative. A lot of our lack of creativity, lack of responsiveness is due to the fact that we're not seeing what's going on. We're living according to our views about what's going on, and they just don't correspond to reality. So therefore, we're not creative. We're just living in kind of an alternative reality that doesn't actually exist. So that's the point, really, is that when we recognize that things aren't turning out the way that we expected, and when we know what's actually really going on, this is why mindfulness is so important, then we can respond. We're freed from those patterns of reactivity, and we can respond to the actual situation which is actually unfolding, and our response will be adequate if it's based on a true perception of what's really there. So that's the liberating aspect. When we see impermanence, when we're keyed into impermanence, when we expect it, when we're anticipating it, we can respond creatively. And this is how this, in a way, understanding of impermanence helps us also to see the mark of unsatisfactoriness. So unsatisfactoriness is that realization that actually things don't conform to our assumptions, that they're unsatisfactory in that sense. They're not permanent. We can't rely on things to unfold in the way that we expect them to. And we stop being disappointed and pissed off all the time, and we stop blaming if we can see that in a way the nature of conditioned things that are put together, is just that they're not entirely satisfactory. This is a particularly interesting area if you're a perfectionist, because when we're in a perfectionist kind of state of mind, we're not recognizing the unsatisfactoriness of conditioned things, that we actually expect that we can replicate in the world outside that idea that we have in our mind perfectly. We don't recognize that things, they only need to be good enough. They don't need to be perfect, actually. So the insight that comes, or the attitude, if we're able to recognize unsatisfactoriness, the positive aspect of that is it's actually a particular samadhi. It's called the directionless or the biaslessness, which means that we can we haven't got this bias or this prejudice of doing things in a particular way. Talked about positively, it's like perfect spontaneity, perfect responsiveness. We just respond to what's there. We're not having this preconceived idea about what it ought to be all the time. So that the image that's given for that state, that samadhi, that state of wholeness, is of a sphere, a perfect sphere on a perfectly flat surface. So it can roll in any direction. It's not impelled or compelled to move in any direction. It can move in whatever direction it needs to move in. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the territory. I want to stop talking now. But just basically an invitation to try and see impermanence in operation, particularly try and notice when what transpires in our life doesn't conform with the idea that we had about how it should go, and being able to recognize that and respond to that creatively. So I guess what I'm saying, why I say that in that way, is it's not, wisdom is not just a thought. Wisdom is about the way that we are. And if we have wisdom, we're able to be more creative and more responsive to whatever life throws at us. So we'll have a break now. If you've got any questions, hopefully you do, about any of that stuff, because I've just stirred up a whole lot of other stuff. Do chuck them into the chat during the break. It's just gone 8 o'clock. So we'll come back at 8:10, and we'll continue our exploration. But do throw in questions as and when they arise in your mind. So see you soon. Okay, so we'll make a start. So thanks for the questions. Great questions. So there's a question from Colin. In theory, sounds great, but in practice, how does this work? For example, someone is rude in traffic, cuts me off. My assumption that I deserve to be treated kindly is challenged. Should I then change and assume that I don't deserve to be treated kindly? So in a way, I was just thinking about this. I think this, in a way, we all deserve to be treated kindly. But I suppose the fact is that we're not always going to be treated kindly. So if we go through life expecting that, then we're going to be disappointed. So it's a matter of, I think in a way there is a view there, an unhelpful view, that the view is not that we should be treated kindly. I mean, we should always be treated kindly, and we should always treat others kindly. That is a good way to live. But the fact is we won't always be. So that if we have that attitude, that when people are kind to us, we'll appreciate it rather than taking it for granted. And when it doesn't happen, it won't put us off, if you see what I mean. Because it'll be, oh, that's me being blamed for something I didn't do, or oh, well, that's what happens. Do you sort of see what I mean? Where are you, Colin? Yeah, I mean, if you want to come back, but if you want to say something in response, please do, because a lot of this stuff is better to discuss than just me talking. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Thanks. Colin just said, "Good answer. Thanks." You can come back at me. I don't mind. um, Liz says, question, core assumptions can be so difficult to uncover. Any suggestions for finding them? So I suppose what I was suggesting before the break is well, basically noticing when you get pissed off, something's being confounded or something's being frustrated. Um, that's one way of noticing. Another way, another really good way, is asking people who know you well. That's quite challenging, and it takes trust. But ask other people, like, what am I like? That's actually, like, if you're interested in overcoming your egotism, that is like that's the strongest and most effective medicine. If you can hack it, is actually ask for feedback. Try and get feedback, because people do see us in a way that we don't see ourselves. Um, if people keep saying things about you, try and notice that. Like, try and think, okay, somebody said that about me, and then I heard that somebody else was saying that, maybe secondhand. But actually, try and notice that stuff. I mean, that's what's so hard about the Dharma life, is we're trying to see ourselves truly, and it's very, very difficult. But I'd say that's one way, and it's interesting because you've got a little addendum, Liz. It says it seems to be the ones we don't know we're living that wreck lives. So, well, when you do wreck something, when something goes belly up, like, try and understand, well, what was my part in that? Um, Not as a way of chastising yourself, because that's generally unhelpful. Trying to apportion blame is generally just unhelpful, but trying to take responsibility for what you did is really, really helpful. Um, I mean, that's apologizing is quite a good one in terms of transformation. Like, recognizing that you did something which was unskillful and actually acknowledging it to somebody else, particularly the person who might have been harmed, is, I think, is one of the most profound spiritual practices. Just apologize. What we tend to do is we tend to get defensive, and we kind of dig in. We kind of dig in behind what happened, but if you're just able to apologize, it can be profoundly transformative. Julianne's saying, can you give more examples of views, please? Are they related to core beliefs? Yeah, I mean, in a way, they are our core beliefs. Like, for example, some of them will be helpful. Like Colin, you mentioned earlier, like, just the idea that it's good to be respectful of other people. I mean, that is a really skillful belief. But we might have an idea that, well, here, that the world owes us a living. That we should be able to do whatever we want, and the world should just fall in behind our desires. And if it doesn't, then we should be aggrieved. We're justified in our, in feeling aggrieved. That's an example of a view. Another view, which is quite pervasive, is that we're somehow responsible for the bad things that happen. That's quite a pervasive one, I think, that we have a lot of us have a habit of condemning ourselves, of even hating ourselves, and feeling bad about things that actually aren't our fault. You notice this, or particularly at the moment, like, if you look at what's going on in India in relation to COVID-19, it's really worth just noticing what your response is, and you might start feeling bad about it. Not, I don't mean feeling compassion, because but actually just feeling kind of bad about it, like you've done something wrong. So that's another a deeper aspect, I think, of appreciating the truth of unsatisfactoriness, is just acknowledging that bad things happen, painful things happen, and it's not necessarily somebody's fault. It's just part of life that there is pain, and it's not necessarily somebody's fault. It might be somebody's fault, but even sometimes just getting indignant. We talked a little bit of this in our discussion group. Just getting indignant about it doesn't necessarily help either. So, does that answer your question, Julianne? Where are you? I can't see you. Oh, you must be on the other page.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Do come back. Do come back, and if you want to hear more or less. Could you please speak more on the idea of impermanence and perfectionism? Yeah. So I think, like, I can be a bit of a perfectionist, and it's almost like I've got this idea in my mind about how I want things to be, and if I don't get it exactly the way that I wanted it to be in my mind, then I feel that it's been a failure. So part of what life is like a lot of the time is that we have ideas about what we want to happen, and then we try and execute them in our life in terms of what we say and what we do. And almost always there's a discrepancy between how we thought of it and the way it actually goes. And I think perfectionism is when we can't accept that discrepancy. And we often blame ourselves for the discrepancy rather than recognizing that it's just the nature of things. But one thing I find really helpful is just to think in terms of things just have to be good enough. They don't have to be perfect, particularly with Dharma practice generally, like your meditation. It just has to be good enough to support awareness. Awareness has to be good enough to help you to notice things a little bit more deeply. You'll notice things a little bit more deeply. It just has to be deep enough just to support little moments of insight. It just has to be enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's actually there's a poem on this theme by Sangharakshita, the founder of our movement. And he's sort of musing on somebody gives him their record collection to say thanks for the teachings and friendship and so on. And the punchline of the poem is, well, your record collection is not perfect, but it's enough to show a genuine gratitude or something like that. So I find sometimes that perfectionism can almost be crippling, because you can never get it. You can never do it the way you can never get it. You can never get that perfection. But actually, what we're really looking for is a kind of, from the Dharmic point of view, is a kind of an ongoing responsiveness that's not hung up about particular outcomes, or it's more of a kind of movement in a general direction. So hopefully that helps. Tamara, I think that was you who asked that question. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a big area, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think. Oh yeah, so Column's got another little addendum here. The wrong view is that if I treat people kindly, I will be treated kindly. Yeah, right, yeah. Right view, if I treat people kindly, the world will be more kind. Yeah, well, that's true, yeah. So if you're kind, there'll be more kindness in the world. So a lot of what it's about is like, well, what's a helpful way to think? Rather than often what happens is we come at the world from absolutes. People should never be angry. People should never cut me off when they're driving. We can't, and then we're constantly frustrated because it doesn't conform to our absolutes. So Buddhism is much more kind of pragmatic. So it's a bit like, what is a helpful way of thinking that's going to help me and others get out of this tangle? So sometimes something might actually be accurate, but just unhelpful. And what I mean particularly here is like you might see somebody's faults. You might see a friend of yours, and you might see their faults, and the fault that you see is real. Other people see it too. But if you think about that a lot, it's not going to be helpful. Even though it's true, it's real. So there's a whole strand of Buddhist teaching which is about wise attention. It's a really, really simple idea that we just have to notice what we're paying attention to and making sure that what we're paying attention to is a wise thing to pay attention to. So generally speaking, paying attention to somebody else's faults is not a good idea. It's just going to get us into a state of aversion. If we have to do that, then we need to come at people's faults from their virtues. Then if we communicate with them, it's likely to be valuable. But if we communicate with somebody only based on an awareness of their faults, it's generally just going to not go well. So Maeve's saying, I think when we find ourselves using intensifiers like always and never in relation to things, people that can point to our mistaken views, that's good. Yeah. Like, can you give us an example, Maeve, in a sentence? You mean like things never work out for me, or?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say no, because I never wrong think, but I'm always right thinking. Yeah, but he always does that.
Yeah.
He never helps out, does the washing up. That sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Another one I've noticed is that if you're really concerned about what somebody else is thinking, that's probably not going to be helpful. Like if you're thinking, why do they do that? Why is he thinking that? Why does he keep? If you're really obsessed with what somebody else is thinking like that, it's not going to be helpful for you. That's another example. Yeah, Sumeda says, sometimes you could have done nothing wrong and still lose. The key is how you respond. That's absolutely true. That's part of unsatisfactoriness, is that, bad things happen to good people. And that could be hard to take, but that does seem to happen, doesn't it? Like, COVID-19 is an example of something which is just indiscriminate. And it's just, it's not, people talk about the virus like it's a self-conscious kind of enemy, but it's just it's a virus. It doesn't have a conscious kind of battle plan. And that's the world that we live in. We live in a world where there's random elements, and we don't have any control over them, but we can control, like that point you're making is how we respond. And it requires strength of character to respond creatively to difficulty and pain. But if and that's part of, like I was talking about, continuity of purpose. That's part of what that continuity of purpose is about developing, is that strength of character, which means we've got the resources to meet the challenges that arise when they inevitably arise. Yeah, so Daniel says, sometimes I push for accuracy in a work conversation because I prefer clarity. This can come across critical or pedantic and lead to bad feeling. Sometimes perhaps more important to be kind than accurate. Yeah, sometimes people talk about, losing the argument but winning the person. And yeah, I mean, that's a whole other more subtle area, is communication, and that, again, that's another whole area that we could spend weeks on, is exploring, how to communicate skillfully. But I think again, it's a matter of like asking yourself the question: well, is this working? So it's important for me to be clear. I mean, I've had the same problem, Dan, with some people that when I sort of ask them to clarify, they feel like I'm having a go at them, which I'm not actually. But it's just that I don't understand what they're saying. So that's a whole area. But probably it's worth realizing that what's most important maybe is the relationship, and sometimes we can compromise the sort of the goodwill in the relationship because we want a particular kind of outcome. I mean, obviously, human communication is like hugely complex, and to actually get yourself across and be understood is something to be really celebrated. Because a lot of the time we misunderstand each other. Again, that's part of the view that we filter what we hear from somebody else through our views. And sometimes we actually just think we think people are saying something they're not saying. So you could say another way of working with views is by listening really deeply, really listening to what people are really saying, maybe even listening to what they're trying to say but aren't saying because they haven't got the right words, or they can't quite get it together. And in a way that brings me to, I just want to make one point and then we'll do some meditation, and that is that another way of working with trying to develop wisdom is just by being truthful. It's a really simple practice, but if we deceive, whether consciously or unconsciously, we're creating a kind of an alternative reality, the reality that's based on thought and based on abstraction, that's different from the actual reality. And it's inherently kind of disintegrating when you can feel it when it's coming from somebody else. You feel this sort of dissonance that you know that what they're saying and what they're feeling isn't the same. What they're feeling and what they're thinking, and you might know it in yourself, and it has this disintegrating effect. As I say, what we're trying to do, it's interesting. Well, we have the word integrity, don't we? With somebody who's honest, we say, well, they've got integrity, and that's connected with this idea of integration. They're whole. We feel like there's something whole about them or trustworthy about them. So I think one way of working with trying to see things as they really are is just actually checking that what we're saying is actually accurate, just in the ordinary factual sense, without leaving aside all the more subtle areas. And trying to be, now I recognize, I mean, we talked a little bit about this in our little group there, is that being truthful at work can be quite difficult. People aren't necessarily going to want to know what we really think. And it also might be compromising for us to say what we really think. But I was thinking, so if you're not able to be truthful at work, it can be really helpful to have another context where you can be truthful about what's happening at work. So I think, again, this is where friendship and community comes in. Where you've actually got a person who you can be honest with, even if you can't be honest in the work situation because of all the kind of maybe political reasons or complex reasons. So this wisdom that we're trying to cultivate, that we're trying to talk about, is something that we can begin to develop in meditation. And it starts, I think, just with an honest self-appraisal, just with being honest about what it is that's really going on, and just trying to see what's really going on a little bit more clearly, trying to see, for example, impermanence. So what we're going to do now is just meditate. We're going to do the mindfulness of breathing, and we're just with a particular slant on trying to notice the way our experience is changing from moment to moment. And hopefully that will have an influence, or sort of perfume our mind, so we'll be more attuned to impermanence at other times also. So if you just want to set yourself up for meditation, and we'll start when you're ready. So things are always just the way that they are. And part of what we need to do is just let go. Let go of our expectations, our assumptions about how things ought to be, even our ideas about what meditation is for or what meditation means. And just be open to what's there. What's there is already an expression of reality. So what is there? We have this thing called experience. What is it? So what's our experience of being a body seated in a room? What's the experience of the body itself resting on what we're sitting on? And what's this thing we call our mind? So there's thoughts arising, probably. So what are they? And where are they? Where do they come from? Where do you feel them arising? And what's your mood? Can you locate it? And what's the experience that corresponds to their word breathing? It might be one experience or several experiences. And it's moving in and out. The breath comes in, the breath goes out, and then that cycle of breathing is finished, and another one starts. So letting your attention, letting your curiosity settle on that, on the breath, the movement of the breath, the changing nature of the breath. If your mind wanders off, that's another example of change. So concentration is more like flow, the participation and engagement with flow, than one thing fixing onto another. So there's nothing wrong with our experience. It's a perfect demonstration of the truth of change. Vividly represented by our breathing. Can we soften into that reality of change? So the breathing has an in and an out. And with the out is a sense of letting go. And can we cooperate with that release, that letting go that happens with the out breath? So impermanence means that things in the past are just that, they're things in the past. They no longer exist in the way that we think about them. And things in the future are thoughts. Right now, that's all they are. What we know is what's presently arising. So without any particular focus, just being with what's arising, just existing. So now is an opportunity to take a memento, a souvenir, as it were, from what we've been talking about into this next part of our life. Is there something we can do to live more in harmony with the way things are by being truthful, by watching out for impermanence, by holding lightly to our plans? So just moving towards closing the meditation. And Stephen, as we're just coming out of the meditation, maybe you could set up breakout rooms of 2.
Yeah, they're ready, Jan and Dara, whenever you want to go.
Okay, so there's an opportunity now just for 3 minutes just to share with somebody else what you intend to do this week. So if you could just get that going now, Stephen, that'd be great. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Is everybody back? Yeah, looks like it. Is everybody back, Stephen?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, I was just chatting to Julie there. We're in a little breakout room, and I just thought maybe part of what this whole process of views, of recognizing views is, first of all, just recognizing that we have them, and recognizing that our views are just our views. Often, even that's just a really good thing to notice. Even just knowing what our views are, and then we can begin to inquire as to whether they're helpful or not. So anyway, hopefully you've got something to kind of go away and chew on for the next week. I certainly have. And just to remind you that we're doing everything for free at the moment. So do think about giving the DBC a donation. That would be great. And if you've got any questions, do stick around, because I'll be here for about another 50 minutes. Yeah. So yeah, do stick around if you've got questions or coming out of what we've been looking at. Yeah, and thanks to all the group leaders. Thanks to Stephen for hosting, and we'll leave it there for this evening. And you'll get the video tomorrow, and